Architects, designers, and creative manufacturers are here to discuss incorporating local craftsmen into commercial projects. We hope the makers will learn more about how architects and designers source their projects and how to best work with other contractors, while architects and designers will gain insight into ordering custom pieces versus from a catalog or a big box store. Basically, these people up here have been building things for stores with architects and redevelopers in Knoxville for a while, and they know how to do it. So without further ado, to moderate your panel, we have Mr. Matthew Cummings with Pretentious Beer and Glass Company. Give him a hand, please.
All right, well, thanks for coming out today, guys. So just start off, I'm going to kind of define creative manufacturing, what we're talking about specifically. Essentially, we're talking about, craftspeople can become creative manufacturers, but not all craftspeople are. It's a bit to do with the scale thing, but it's also essentially being able to do handmade products on a scale that can be incorporated into architectural designs. It can be either tables, chairs, pendants, lighting fixtures, servingware. There's a lot of things that can be incorporated in there. So that's specifically what we're talking about with creative manufacturing. So we've got the panel. I'll introduce everybody from the panel here. We have Richard Foster from McCarty, Wholesale McCarty. We have Spencer Ratliff from Old North Designs. Derek White from Bird on a Wire Studios. And then we have Carly Stribling from Soil and Steel. And then we have Peter Osicki from Johnson and Gallion Constructions. And then Michael Davis from Sanders Pace Architecture. So this is I feel really honored to have these guys on the panel. This is definitely an all-star group. So we'll go ahead and get into this right off the bat. What we're going to do is we're going to break this into two halves. So I want this to be kind of a dual educational experience where we've got three amazing architects that have been incorporating handmade items into their build-outs for a while now. And then we have three makers who actively work as creative manufacturers, produce things on an individual gallery sale, but also working into these larger build-outs. So we're going to start with the architects. And I want each side we're going to be going through kind of the process from beginning to end to give everyone insight on the two different sides to this coin. So I'm going to start off with one of the architects. Let's just start off with, how do you procure craftspeople for your projects? Who wants to talk about that?
So I'm Michael Davis. We do a lot of different types of projects. We do residential, we do commercial projects. And so for us, we have a lot of different ways of procuring them. So several projects have been people that we've known, that we are familiar with what they do, and we find a kind of a niche where we can say, okay, we need furniture. We want furniture to be a really special part of this project, and we'll approach somebody to do that. So for example, on Wild Love, we used Holler Design from Nashville, who we had used previously on a project, and brought them in at the beginning of construction to start to work on doing custom furniture for that build out. So really it's a lot of either people we know or word of mouth, but we also will kind of seek it out based on knowing what's happening here in Knoxville. So trying to find people here locally now who do things that we can kind of start to see we have a need for within a project.
So I would agree with that. I think a lot of it is kind of relationship built. And I would also say that there's kind of different ways that you go about it. And it depends on the project and kind of the level of collaboration. Every project in terms of architecture is really a collaboration. Architects tend to be somewhat of control freaks. But I say that kind of in the best way. Like our goal is, at the end of the day, everything is controlled and kind of looks like it belongs and is cohesive. So, there's the aspect of kind of getting someone involved early on in the process where you can have some of that dialogue in terms of, here's the overall vision, how do we collaborate together? Just like, architects, we bring on consultants, across the board from landscape architects and so forth. So kind of bringing on the creative makers and fabricators early on in the process so that the design is really cohesive. There's also the idea that it could be kind of a one-off kind of installation or an art exhibit type of thing where there's a space within the design that's kind of left there, and then you kind of work with the creative manufacturer kind of towards the end as you know, here's where this goes, and let's kind of work together to create something really special. So I think there's kind of two ways of kind of looking at that.
And how I've found them is in a very unconventional way. So Matthew did a Pachakacha talk when we were doing when I was the architect on the Regal headquarters. And so that's how I found Matthew to do this really amazing glass installation. Derek, I was the architect on Elkmont, and the contractor brought him on to do these really cool things. And now I'm on the contractor side. I can now use him for a whole bunch of things. And then with Spencer, literally, we were looking for somebody who could do resin-filled panels on a project that I'm doing in Walland, and found him on Instagram. And it's been amazing. So kind of all over the place of how to find somebody. Sometimes it's you meet someone at Pachakacha, or you meet someone here. And other times it's just word of mouth or people you've worked with before. So kind of all over the place.
Do you guys have any recommendations if we have makers out here who are interested in getting involved in creative manufacturing? Kind of the best way to approach people like yourselves about getting tied into those projects? Do you have any recommendations for how they approach that? Network?
So I think the hardest thing is trying to know who's out there doing things, right? Mm-hmm. So as an architect, we have reps for tile and things who bring things by our office all the time of like, here's all the new stuff and here's what we do. So like as Peter's saying, sometimes we don't find out about somebody except through Instagram or through one of my friends in town who's like, oh, have you seen this person doing this thing? They're really good at it. Or seeing like First Friday, seeing somebody do something. So I would say don't be afraid. Like for us as architects, we're used to people dropping stuff off at our office to see things, but like try and like get engaged with us to say, here, I can do this is what I can do. Let me know if you want, if we can work on a project together. So the number one thing is just to let us know that you're there. That's probably some of the hardest thing. Until like you can go into a space, and I can remember asking Peter, like, who did the stuff on Elkmont? And he was like, oh, Burr on the Wire. But I never heard of Burr on the Wire until I asked Peter. So I think that's probably the hardest thing is getting out there to start to know what the capabilities are and what those things are that you want to work on.
Yeah, and shameless plug real quick, as part of the Makers Council, one of the things that we're working on is our Makers Directory. If you're a maker in town, you haven't signed up for that and updated your information, that's a great resource that we're getting together for exactly this type of situation. So if you haven't done it yet, sign up for that directory. Okay, well, let's talk about what stage do you like to incorporate makers and creative manufacturers into the build-out process?
So I think I spoke to that just a few minutes ago from my point of view, and it comes back to that kind of two different ways that you come about the project, and the level of creativity that's kind of going into it, right? There's so early in the phase, kind of end of schematic, early design development. If you're really going to collaborate with the maker on the project, I think that's a really good time to bring them in and start the dialogue, so that way that the architecture can start to kind of respond to what the maker is doing, and the maker can kind of directly start to respond to what the architecture is doing. If it is more of an installation, and I know McCarty is working with Matthew on a fantastic art installation at the new UC, that's kind of more of a kind of one-off special moment within the building, and that's going to be just kind of phenomenal, but that can kind of happen later in the process, and you really can kind of dive deep, when you get into design, later design development, early into construction documents, kind of really start working through that.
Yeah, I think that's very similar to the way that we do a lot of things. So a lot of time it'll either be as the design is developing, or what we would call construction documents. So when we're really trying to detail out a project and be able to give something executable to the contractor. So a part of that's also, a lot of times we like to go in to, when the project is getting bid, to have the budgeting for that too. So I think that's an important part of the process when you're working with especially a creative manufacturer, is knowing what it's going to cost at that point. So when it's being bid, so the ability for somebody to come in and be able to put a price to that and say, well, this is how much it's going to be, I think is important as an allowance to show this is, and for it not to get cut from the project. So as architects, we encounter a lot of times if you bid a project, comes in too expensive, and we want to protect the things that we feel are really important to the project, which are a lot of times the more custom parts. So having that price locked in early and knowing, okay, this is what this is, and having that on the upfront helps protect that some too. So that's another reason why we like to have them on, at least getting knowledge about the project during design, so they know what's coming and aren't just seeing it for the first time during construction. So I think that's a really important part of that. And then as well, a lot of times we'll engage somebody during construction if it's a more unique piece, because then it's more about responding to the space as it's coming up, because things change during construction too. That's another thing that's important, is that the project will never be the same as you draw it as it's going to get built. So there's also some reaction stuff that has to happen too. So yeah.
And just real quick, to echo Michael's point, is that having something when we're putting price on the contractor side is really helpful, because you hate to have, here's a $10,000 allowance and it comes in really $20,000. So if you're a creative manufacturer or a maker, being able to accurately price what you're doing in the design phase, and that's really hard to do. So it takes practice. In the first couple times may not be successful, but it's very, very important to do that.
Yeah, great comment right there. Absolutely. That's one of the. There's a lot more to phasing up to creative manufacturers than just, like I said, scale, and that's one of the aspects. There's a lot of parts to the process. So can you tell us a little bit about? So we've talked about how you bring people in, about what time you bring people in. Can you give us some insight into successful projects that you've done, and kind of what made that a successful incorporation of a creative manufacturer?
So one of the projects that I worked on right around the corner here at Dopo, that had kind of inclusion of several pieces, and Forrest Kirkpatrick is in the back. He designed a lot of the furniture and kind of custom kind of millwork pieces within that. We kind of, working with Brian Strutz on that project, kind of laid out kind of an aesthetic for the project and kind of overall kind of parameters for what we were looking for in terms of both furniture as well as kind of concrete tops and those sorts of things. And then kind of brought, Forrest came on board and kind of helped kind of push that forward. And I think that turned out really successfully.
I'll talk about the project over at Regal, and that was, we got Matthew involved pretty early on, probably in DD phase, and it required a lot of work to get that in there, to price it accurately, and he came up with several different options of here's different size globes, different hanging apparatus, and all that sort of thing. And we went through probably 6 or 7 iterations to do that, as well as putting it in a 3D modeling program and actually adding light to it to say, okay, here's the amount of light that's coming out in this face, so modeling that whole thing, which we had at McCarty. We did that, and also our lighting consultant did that as well. And so it took a lot of burden off of Matthew. He turned over sketches, we put that in the computer, and revised it several times. And so having that time in DD and CD to do that made it really successful. In the end, it turned out really nice.
I spoke to Wildlove, where we work with Holler, and that's a really successful project because they're able to really communicate through a shop drawing process. So as you talk about there, I think shop drawings are something that as architects we're really used to seeing. So whether it's hand drawings or computer stuff or 3D modeling or even mock-ups, those things are important to be able to communicate not only to us but to our clients, like what are they getting. So we went through several rounds of shop drawings to get that furniture designed, which was custom designed for that space. We've also used a number of other creative manufacturers to do different light fixtures, which is a similar kind of thing, just like Peter's saying about mock-ups and having options. I think options is another thing that's important. So to be able to talk about, okay, well, we can do it this way, or we can do it, and then bringing your feedback to say, but it might be cheaper to do it this other way. So I think again on Wildlove, he actually brought us a couple of different options for the chairs before moving forward with one. So yeah, I think I think that's one that I really enjoyed that process and really made the space for Wild Love, which was filling out that space with all that custom furniture, and we're really happy with that. So yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
One more point.
Yeah.
I will say mock-ups are key to get something incorporated into a project. So if the owner, especially it's the owner, if they can see, hey, here's exactly what this is going to look like. So the glass globes, live edge doors, if they can see it, then they'll fight for that to stay in the project because they know how much value it adds to it. So if you can't draw, do mock-ups.
Yeah, and one thing you'll notice that we're talking about what makes a successful project. We haven't even started talking about building it. So this is, I mean, you have to incorporate in your prices. You're not just selling a piece. There's a lot of work that goes into it ahead of time. So make sure that you give yourself that as part of the budget to make the mock-ups, do the shop drawing, incorporate that into it. Or else you're going to be doing a lot of work for free that you didn't plan on. Okay, so real quick, we'll wrap this up and kind of do this last question twofold. Are there any experiences that you've had that were good learning experiences? Things to avoid, and recommendations to creative manufacturers, and things not to do, and then also finish that up with, hug, slap, hug. So finish that up with a hug of just some advice that you have to creative manufacturers, and then we'll turn it over to the makers.
I haven't had a really a bad experience to speak to that, but a couple of things that in going through this and seeing it is that pricing it right is key, and then having mock-ups is key. So making sure you build that into your price and you're able to do those. I think those are the two biggest keys to having a successful project is that.
So I would agree with that. I've had projects where we tried to kind of get something incorporated kind of on the creative side that ended up not being in the project just because the budget couldn't, at the end of the day, support it. And it was aspects that were pretty important. So being able to kind of get the budget right, I think, is really key. I would also say being able to kind of know where this project kind of fits within that spectrum, right? Is it something that is really a piece of the architecture and therefore kind of really needs to kind of work with the cohesion of the project? And if that's the case, I think it's important not to kind of go rogue on the architect and the designers and come in with something completely different. Because oftentimes the client has seen something, they bought into a concept, and so that could be an easy way for it to kind of fall off of the project. And then, if it's more of kind of furniture that's really kind of filling out the space, or that kind of one-off kind of installation art piece, then there's certainly a lot more flexibility for really kind of having that personal hand. I think in all of these cases, what we're looking for is to have that personal hand in the projects because it really makes it unique to where we are in Knoxville. And so just kind of last piece of advice, I think being able to, join the directory that Matthew was talking about, I think is key. Getting in front of architects. I'm also right now the president of the AIA, which is the American Institute of Architects. And, we've been working together on ways that we can find opportunities for makers and architects to get to know each other. We're always looking for those because we don't know, both Michael and Peter mentioned a few moments ago, we don't know exactly what's going on out there. So the better that you can get it in front of us, whether that's at a Pachakacha where you really can kind of showcase what you do, or even stopping in and kind of visiting with architects, keep in mind that, we have people dropping in all of the time. It really can be a 5 to 10 minute stop by. It doesn't need to be, an hour of time, but just be able to kind of start to kind of plant seeds in our brains so that when the opportunities come up, we have something in mind that then we can kind of reach back out to you.
I think that probably the one hiccup that I've encountered using creative manufacturers is schedule. So that's probably the hardest one to overcome. Is like, you have a schedule, it needs to be there, and making sure that you're going to hit that on time. So I've never had something where it stopped the project from finishing, but it might be delayed, especially when you're doing things like light fixtures and things which are needed there for inspection purposes and things like that. So I think that leads me to my advice, which is that you should there are two parts to this. One is to have good communication. So like, don't ghost out the contractor or the design team. Like, if you're running into issues, communicate those up front to say, hey, this is actually where this is. So because we're really good at coming up with like plan Bs to things. Like, contractors do that all the time. Like, have to come up and adjust things to that, but they can't do that unless you're honest. So that's the second part, is to be honest with your pricing, with your level of execution, with your commitment, because ultimately we all want a good product. And I think that's why we also use creative manufacturers, is that they care about what you put in there. Like, look, you're a craftsman and you want it to look really good and you care about it. So be honest about what you're able to do and execute, I think, is the other part.
That's great. That's perfect. Thank you.
One last point. To Ricky's point, we love meeting you. So don't be intimidated by coming into an architecture firm. And I'm not in architecture anymore, but or a contractor's firm. But we love to meet you. So don't be intimidated. There's somebody at most firms that just like would geek out for an hour on like what you can do. So don't be too intimidated.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. And ultimately, we would love to be able to see every project we do fully custom, right? And most budgets can't support that, but that's why we love you, because you can help kind of bring that really interesting custom piece to the project. So.
And there's another selfish plug. We started an annual. We did our first annual Makers Living Space at Pretentious Gallery. So if you're not comfortable meeting them face to face, you want a middle person, you can hit us up. We'll be doing it again next year. We accept applications for it, and then we do this as a way to highlight what Knoxville can create for these projects. And then we partner with the architecture firms, and then we bring all of the architects in to get to see it actually in place. So now let's switch over to the other side of the coin. We're going to start getting some insight from the makers who are doing creative manufacturing here in Knoxville and who make absolutely breathtaking work, as a side note. So let's just go ahead and start off from the beginning. Like, how did you get involved with creative manufacturing, and how do you approach these projects? Derek's going to try not. He's going to talk this whole time. He's trying to keep it back.
I don't have to. What was the question?
How did you start getting involved in creative manufacturing projects? How do architects approach you about these projects?
I usually get brought in fairly quickly. I think most of them, like Peter had said. I mean, they talk about their successes. People see it, and then they discuss it with other architects. Other architects ask, "Hey, man, who in the heck did that?" And I just that's what I wanted to do when I started Bird on the Wire. I mean, I wanted to do creative manufacturing. I wanted to be kind of a know-it-all and a do-it-all.
Congratulations, you succeeded.
Yeah, almost. Of course, I realized in this whole thing I don't really know crap, man. It's about the only thing I do know. So, I mean, I knew that I was always wanting to be a sculptor and an artist, and the creative manufacturing edge provided me a platform and the money and the time, because I knew I had to have a space, and I didn't know if I'd be able to justify that. So I've always been very strong business to business. I love business people. I love making dreams come true. So, architects, designers, they're creative visionaries. We speak the same language, even though we don't always get along. We do. We speak the same language. They see something that it's never been seen before, and they want to make it real. And same with us. The creative manufacturer, we see that project complete long before we ever order the material, before we ever put pen to paper. And so I knew I wanted to be a part of that with people who I could learn from, who could learn from me, people who shared the same language and shared the same type of visions, and especially professional. I love the professional aspect of creative manufacturing. And
so Derek, how'd you get your first job? So you came in wanting to become a creative manufacturer. So how'd you get your foot in the door?
Well, I was, I'm a transplant, so I moved here a little over 5 years ago, and to go to school and just kind of change my perspective on life. And so I did a lot of volunteer work. reached out. I'm sorry. I'm a creative manufacturer. We focus 80% usually on metal. And then, of course, most everything that has metal is going to either have wood or glass or plastic or lighting. We do signs. We do chandeliers. We do tables, chairs, fire pits, fountains. I mean, we do anything with a artistic edge that somehow captures the vision of the designers. We really love to do that. That's everything. I make everything, pretty much. So when I moved here, I started volunteering in theater and music, build outs and stages and things of that nature, because I have a kind of a long background history in that area, and just started making myself available, and I didn't charge. So people were like, yeah, come on board, and so I would build and build and build, and it gets noticed. My very first job came from an art show I did out at IAMS with Symphony in the Park, and they were going under a major reconstruction of their entrance. They saw that I was not only artistic, but I was very architectural and design oriented, and that I understood this tangible branding, this kind of identifying them in my product. And so they hired me. And then corporate-wise, it became Sugarland's Distilling Company. And I've been their production artist and maker for, literally 5 years, working with Dogwood and Rhythm and Blooms. Those are how I kind of got started. And I started out cheap so that, I threw a bone, do a $22,000 sign for $8,000, and then they see what they get, and then you start just kind of begging for more money as you go along, right? But that's how I got started.
Cool. All right, Spencer, Carly.
I believe my medium led me to be a creative manufacturer. I do metalwork, and while I like to do sculptural stuff, I really like to bring an artistic bent to making what otherwise might be more utilitarian, like railings and chandeliers and lighting, and even into doing beds and stuff like that. And I've largely gone through word of mouth so far. I've been really lucky working with builders and then just having an online presence. If your name gets out there, then they can look around, do a little research on you, see what you've done, and hopefully builders talk to each other and get around that way.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar to Derek. I kind of like to be the do-all sort of guy. Only I focus more on woodworking. Probably I'm more like 80% wood, 20% metal and other things. But so I think the biggest thing for me was just kind of, like doing a lot of networking, trying to get out there as much as possible, meeting people, just because I think I would say still most of like the construction industry is all still word of mouth, and so like the more you meet people, the more you'll meet other people, and eventually being somebody who's just like there's a way. I have the mindset that there's just a way to do anything, and even like really complicated things. And so, it's like, for instance, I'd say one of my first commercial jobs was doing some circular table bases for jewelry television, and the contractor, it was like, oh, where do I have no clue where I can get circular table bases. And then, somebody has the suggestion, oh, this guy can probably figure out a way to do it. And I figured out a way to do it. And so you sort of just get a reputation for what you do, and word eventually gets around. It might take a while, but word will get around. But then some of the other things, it's all been really random. Like, I think you just kind of need to be, as a creative person, you just need to be really proactive at just being friendly and meeting people. Actually, the very first one was Knox Whiskey Works, and I met those guys at Public House because I'm a really loud person, especially when I'm drinking. And he heard me talking very excitedly about whiskey because I really like whiskey. and he was, like a couple tables over, and so he comes over, puts a bottle of whiskey on the table, and was like, try some of that. And he tells me, oh, yeah, we're starting up Knox Whiskey Works, blah, blah, blah. And I guess because I had had a few drinks, I was feeling really bold. And I said, hey, do you have anybody doing your build out? And for some reason, they didn't. He was like, no, we don't. I think it was like a dawning moment of like, oh, no, who's doing our build out? and so it's just like random moments, or with Peter, it was Instagram. That's literally the only client I've ever gotten from Instagram. And you have.
Now you're doing a kick-ass bar prize.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's you. It's like I had a business Instagram because you feel like that's just what you're supposed to do. I don't really ever know if it'll do any good. And then oh yeah, people actually do, look at Instagram for businesses apparently. So it's been pretty random, but I think it is just kind of trying to get in there and like any little avenue possible and just making yourself known.
Yeah. Okay, so follow up on that. When do you guys prefer to be incorporated into the build-out stage? Do you want to be right at the very beginning? Do you want to be after they get the construction drawings done? Do you like to work with the interior designers later in the process? Do you have a preference?
For me, working my schedule and getting that figured out from job to job, I like to be involved as quickly as humanly possible. But at the same time, it's also nice if it's a building that's already built and is going and it's a renovation. It's nice to be able to see the space and to design to it and to just find out as much about your client as possible, what kind of aesthetics, style they like, and to be able to design to that. So as early as possible for me.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree. I mean, of course, if it's so early that there's hardly an idea of what needs to happen, it's those meetings aren't super helpful. But yeah, just to know what's coming down the pipeline, especially if it's larger jobs. Like some of the jobs that I'm working on with Peter. We've been talking about these things for 6 months or something like that. But they're very complicated projects, and so there's been lots of moving parts that I need to kind of get in order. So it's actually been really helpful having that much time in hand.
Yeah. Oh, you want to go on?
The beginning, the middle, and the end is where I like to be involved. It all depends on a lot of how the architect or the designer are really, if they even have intentions of using this. I mean, if architects and designers are planning on really making an impact, using some, makers to be a part of the design process, man, I love it right up front. Because as much as I love architects, designers, engineers, makers, I'm not really big about bringing plans to me. This is, hey, you're a maker. Can you make this? Because number one, I see flaws in it from my perspective because I've made things like that before, and it's very difficult to try to convey that without stepping on egos and feelings and things of that nature. And I've had numerous projects where I've been given blueprints and I see the flaws in it, and I build it regardless. And it always comes and bites me. And usually, as I build rapport with those designers and those architects, they bring something on board. I can go, that's not going to work, guys. I mean, it looks good on paper, and yeah, in a 20-minute segment of DIY may prove, to you in some way, but I'm telling you, these materials aren't going to work this way. And plus, I love the idea that in the beginning you can talk budget. Budget is huge. We don't have reps. There's not a rep out there repping small scale creative manufacturers, because we do so many things. There's not a catalog of everything I do. All I have is a portfolio of the things I've done, and hopefully that speaks volumes about what I'm capable of doing. So, you know, we're in competition with these multi-million-dollar lighting firms and sales houses and stuff who are constantly bringing collateral and building relationships and have these budgets so that when build outs are done, design phases are done, you know, they go to those books. And that's the first place that they go. So if they are planning on using some, you know, the paradigm's shifting. You know, the maker is rising. You know, I know it's just that the culture is sort of a whisper right now, but people are leaning into it, and they're seeing it start to rise. So architects are going, wait a minute, we can build the budget and work together with these people, and from the beginning of the project, with the, you know, involving us from the very beginning, because like Carly said, I mean, you know, we have to know our time, you know, because I'm limited. I mean, you know, we work very, very hard, and blood, sweat, tears, and we're trying to do everything that we can to provide that kind of product up front that makes that architect and that designer and that engineer look like, man, those guys got it going on. I mean, they know how to resource, you know. That's what our goal is. It's not just to make ourselves look good. It's to make those guys look like they are king of what they do. So the beginning, in the middle, is always nice, especially when you start getting aesthetics like you were talking about, furniture and those things that are just sort of peripheral but yet have an impact. You know, when you walk in, that middle area is always a wonderful thing. And the end, I mean, like with Elkmont, you know, even at the end, they just kept singing the accolades of Bird on the Wire Studios and the talented individuals that were a part of that. At the end of that project, they were award, and they'd go, thank you to, you know, this guy and this guy and this guy. And so I think it's a little bit budget, money, time, design in the beginning, you know, middle. What else can you gather from those things?
Yeah.
How else can we help each other? Because
Yeah.
by the time you get to the middle, you've developed some teamship, you know, some teamship, and then at the end on accolade, both directions.
Okay, it's perfect. You actually answered the next question too, so we'll go into that. We'll get Spencer and Carly on this. So I think, you know, we're talking about what makes a build out successful. Literally everything you were talking about. So let's hear from you guys as far as a big part of that is the relationship between the creative manufacturer and the architect and designer. So can you guys talk about successful projects you've had and how that relationship influenced the level of success?
Yeah, I think kind of it might just be maybe a little bit redundant, but I'd say probably one of the biggest things is just communication, being very clear. You know, Peter mentioned timelines. You know, that's obviously the biggest stressor with construction projects is always timelines. Those things get pushed around a lot. And for the creative person, it is just being realistic, and also I'd say probably one of the bigger reasons that people aren't realistic about it is because they like really want the job, and so they want to kind of like land it by being, oh yeah, we can do it, you know, really soon. But if you can't do it that soon, then that's really just going to end up hurting your reputation, and then you're just going to, you know, damage your business in the long run. And so, being realistic is like if it turns out you can't do the job, then that won't necessarily make you look bad. It'll just make you look busy, and which is actually a good thing. And so it's better to you know, not take on more than you can handle and do a really good job at the things you do have than to take on too much and just do a really shitty job at everything. And so as far as, what was the question again?
How the
Where am I?
relationship between yourself and the architect made a successful project.
Oh, okay. Well, can I brainstorm on that for a second?
I was just going to back up the communication and flexibility of it all. I've worked with a few different architects. My favorite job in particular was some people who were renovating a house in Island Home, and they brought me in to design the lighting on the front porch. and I really got a sense of the homeowner's sense of style and design, and so I designed lighting, and then that evolved into a handrail, which evolved into a larger railing job for them, and then that ended up evolving into making a partner's desk, which I built in conjunction with the builders and the architects. So yeah, just being flexible as possible and having good communication, and yeah.
I'm also probably going to speak a little less specifically about us specific jobs and more just overall. And I think it's just like from both sides, honoring what the other person's expertise is, I think is really important. You know, I'd say I see a lot of people in my field try and encroach a little too much on the architects and designers' expertise, because again, and I've been guilty of that because I consider myself a furniture designer and maker, and you know, sometimes there is that ego thing that comes in, and you want to say, oh yeah, I'm really good at design, let me, you know, kind of help you with your design, and they don't really like that, you know, because they're the expert designer. Realistically, you know, we're just like a little bit lower on that totem pole, and you just kind of have to respect that. And you know, hopefully you will end up working with good architects and designers who will also respect your expertise of really, like, our expertise is being the really detail oriented, you know, kind of like Derek was saying, you know, they're dealing with lots of big picture details and things like that, and they can hand us a set of plans, and we notice the really small details, the more tangible details that can make, or functional details that can make a difference. And you know, hopefully you'll start working with people who will respect that and listen to you, and you know, allow your input in those things. But I guess, you know, a negative example is probably one time we didn't do that. We had some people talking with us about some light fixtures, and some of the guys that I was kind of partnering with wanted to, you know, push their altering of designs, you know, maybe a little bit too much, and eventually that project just kind of like fizzled out because they didn't like any of our designs. They liked their designs. But you know, the relationship actually was kind of saved because we kind of realized that we back off a little bit, and you know, kind of just more be, I guess, in a sense, more realistic with our expertise, stick with that. You know, it's just, you just kind of need to be okay with saying like, okay, I'm actually not an expert in that field, and so I'll just kind of let the experts be the experts, and I'll do what I do.
Yeah, and sometimes you're not a designer in the project, you're a fabricator.
Right.
You know, you're an expediter for their vision, and that's, you know, an equally valuable thing.
Yeah, and so sometimes I think it's also good to have that conversation up front as well. It's like when I have, usually it's more with, well, I mean, sometimes with designers, but when somebody initially starts talking to me about a job, oftentimes it is the conversation of, are you looking for, you know, manufacturing skills, or are you wanting design services as well? You know, it's like, it's okay to just ask that, like, you want help with design in any way or not.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're running out of time here a little bit, so we want to field some questions if anybody has it. On a topic that I'd like to have talked about previously, you can talk to these guys individually today as kind of the transition of discussing the differences between something being mass-produced and something being custom-made. I think that's an important part of the discussion. But for now, we're going to go forward with questions from the audience. If anybody has anything, any questions, comments, concerns, colloquialisms? We've got a mic we'll be passing around.
Make sure and talk like into the mic. Eat the microphone.
Nom, 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 nom.
So this is a selfish question. Me and my business partner here, we're brand designers. So we design brands and do branding for businesses. We're currently working with some businesses that don't have a building yet. At what point for architecture or makers does any of that intersect? So like with brand designers, from our perspective, we're branding their whole business, but we don't come in on these specific parts. Do you ever have times where you intersect with people like us? And where could we be helpful in that process?
Yeah, so we've worked with marketing and graphic design agencies on a lot of different projects. I'll give you, I'll just keep Wild Love on that. So that was through Nathana, and we collaborated with them to make sure to see how they were scheduling their design meetings to think about branding and how we were going to try and incorporate that for potential places to do signage or logos or what's the window graphic going to be. So that's definitely a dialogue that needs to happen, and I think it's also something that we like to try and push on, because just like there's people doing fabrication for railings and things like that, like signage and wayfinding is really important to a project, and that's another facet that can be something that's tailored to a specific project. So I do think that you should, I think it's probably important to understand what your responsibility is with that and then how you're going to hand that off. So a lot of times we'll work with the graphic designer, who then we have to execute some of the more complex signage designs for them, or help find a fabricator who's going to execute like a giant laser cut Loch Ness monster like we did for Lock and Key recently. Like it's huge. It's like 6 feet tall. But trying to figure out how you're going to incorporate that branding is another thing that's really important.
Immediately, and call the maker first before the architect. I was in brand integrity for 15 years. And what a lot of makers do, one of the things that we do bring to the table, is that we are able to tangibly express that brand. And I'm not talking about, oh, we got it cut and we got it put onto a piece of wood. We're able to a brand is a heartbeat. People, they're really close to that. They're trying to desperately identify themselves, with their potential clients, with the world around us. And so reaching out to us, because we have to have an architect on things of that nature, and we have a lot of them that we can call. And I'm not saying don't call architects, you call them too, but I would say as soon as those things are in the process, as soon as you guys have went perfect, that's it, man. That says that's an identifier of who we are. And they start to express dreams of expansion and building and moving into that thing, and they want to be able to express that brand in the tangible world around them. I think you immediately start reaching out. And the good thing about being in this area, people, is we all know each other. I mean, there are projects at Bird on the Wire that are not my style, that are very much Carly's style, or very much, we need the wood, and we know each other, we collaborate with each other, and we turn over jobs to the people who do that job well, like what, Spencer was saying. I know when it's not my job, and I'm not desperate to just take on everything. So immediately, as soon as it says yes.
So we're talking about integrating creative manufacturing into new build-outs, which is great. But what about existing businesses that want to sort of support the maker movement and start integrating some of that creative manufacturing into their existing businesses? Do you have any good places to start, or just advice on doing something like that?
I mean, you start with design. I mean, get a vision, write your vision down and start to rehearse it. So when you explain what you see, when it comes to makers, we just like to buy in. I mean, you give me your vision, if I make it mine, and then we come together and we do it. So, I work on a lot of projects like that. They see it going in a different way. They want to add something else to their current building, current projects. I mean, we love retrofitting. We're creative problem solvers. That's what we do. And so we love that challenge. I mean, if there wasn't the creative problem solving, it wouldn't be fun. And most makers I know have an artistic background, so we're not really afraid of mediums that we've never touched, because we've touched them and had failures and successes. So it's easy for us. I wouldn't say easy. It's not uncommon for us to be approached with products and materials and mediums that we've never touched, but we still can feel it somewhere intuitively that we know we can do it. So I think anytime that you're ready to do it, reach out to one, because I've got 9 of my best friends do exactly what I do. Exactly. I mean, we have a community above competition in this city. It's why we are one of the reasons we are the Maker City. You know, I'll send you where you need to go. Spencer would definitely do it. I know Carly would. So, and any of these guys would definitely lead you towards a maker if they've worked with us and they can stand by our work. Peter would tell you all day, yeah, man, you need to go talk to Derek, right? So, I mean.
Yeah, I will say, knowing the makers, and so if they get directed work, it can come to you. But we do, most buildings that architects do and contractors do are not new buildings. They're mostly renovations of things. So knowing architects and having them be comfortable with what your work is, and so if a project comes along, they're like, oh, absolutely, I know who to call, who will do this, or call Derek and I can't really do that, but this other person, I vouch for them, they're really good, and so you find new people from that. But on a remodel, there's always an architect involved, and so just knowing who the architect is and. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think don't be afraid to ask people who did that. Like, how did you do that? Like, we love, like, as designers, we like talking about it. People who have these things in their spaces love to tell a story about how they got those things. So don't be afraid to approach them if you see something somewhere and you want to do something that's different, but in the same vein, or take on that rebranding. I mean, I think having a vision is also the important thing. Like starting to, and whether that's having, if you go through rebranding through a graphic designer or something like that, that's a place to start. Or if it's more about the space, it's about bringing somebody in who can start to think about transforming that, whether it's an architect or a maker. So I think understanding the process is also good. So like asking people, how did you do that? How did you change? Like, I think those are important things.
Here I come.
Run.
Of course. For a couple of years, I've been watching this process in Knoxville and thinking about it conceptually. Imagine the University of Tennessee and the School of Architecture, School of Journalism, and ad infinitum around the campus. And you'll find in the statements in the School of Agriculture, the art and science of, and then fill in the blank. And so you can use as a model that where y'all are working is that intersection of the art and science of creation. And on one side brings a lot of the history, and the science has objectivity, looking at beauty of the human face, for example. It can be measured objectively by the width of the eyes and the height and look for the ideal, beautiful form. But then you have the person who just has the experience with beauty, and they bring those together. So it's a different set of eyes. And in every field, so as you go forward as a community, if you'll think about how are the things we're discussing here, how are they also being discussed within other disciplines? And I think that you'll come up then with some new ideas about that intersection of the art and science and possibilities of how you can go as well as where you would go.
Okay.
Whitey just stopped y'all's panel dead.
Was there a question in there? Yeah. What was Do we have time for one more, or you want to?
We got about 1 minute. Anybody got a burning desire in the room? Burning desire.
Quick question. One quick question.
Questions only.
I wonder if the panelists would see an opportunity for Knoxville as the maker city to do a commercial space version of what happened in Asheville, North Carolina 10 years ago at Handmade House at the Ramble. It was a collaboration between a developer, high-end developer, Biltmore Farms Homes, and Handmade in America, a crafts promoting nonprofit. 50 or 60 artists and craftspeople got contracts to incorporate their work in this residence in terms of ceramic tile, glass, metal, fireplace, mantles, countertops, just everything. And then another 50 or 60 artists had their work for the month-long opening. Is this a model that could work for this community? The purpose of it was to get the attention of developers, architects, designers, homeowners, potential homeowners to think from the very beginning of how can fine craft be incorporated into an integrated design for this structure. Is there an opportunity for retail spaces to do something similar in Knoxville?
I've been talking but I'll keep going. I don't know that model, okay? I mean, I'm not familiar with that. I do know that this city is incredible. And as far as collaborating, bringing architects and makers together, designers together, reaching out to that community. I mean, I've already met Michael, and it was Richard. I'm sorry. I forgot your name for a second. You know, two people I didn't know. I mean, this is an incredible summit. You know, yes, there are a lot of people out there that are showcasing makers' works. Makers are constantly praising designers, engineers, architects, and other makers. You know, we are learning how to patronize with purpose in this city on that kind of level. So I don't know about that model as far as somebody doing that. But, you know, we have Knox Makers downtown that is an introduction to get to know yourself in making in those type of ways. We have events like this. The AIA is constantly throwing on things, inviting us with over at Pretentious. He's got a maker's living room. I mean, my shop's always open for events. I don't charge for it. I mean, you know, people who want to do things like that, we are open and we love each other. And we are all, you know, somehow yoked together. Our successes and failures are kind of running in tandem right now. So we'll see what happens. You know, great city, I'm telling you.
That's excellent. You guys give it up for our panel. And thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Go ahead, Matt.
One of the big things that we've been talking about is networking, and the Maker Summit is a great beacon in the calendar year for the maker community. But, you know, all this developing relationships we have, there's lots of monthly meetings that you can come to outside of just this event. We've got the Makers Meetup that the council organizes. Pachaka-cha is amazing things. So please make sure, you know, this isn't like going to church on Christmas Day. You know, come to the other events. Come and hang out with us.
I just want to say one thing. Just do really good work, and you'll get noticed. You know, we are constantly, Michael mentioned, asking Peter who did something. We are paying attention to every single space that we ever go into. And if it's really done well, we will see it. We will pay attention. We will start seeking you out. So everything you do, just do it really well.
Give it up again.